At KPMG, we make the difference. It's not just something we say, it's what we do. Like uncovering unique insights that use AI to battle sepsis, developing bold industry solutions to enable first-of-its-kind farming automation, or creating better outcomes like using data to help prevent catastrophic wildfires. Brighter insights, bolder solutions, better outcomes. It's how our people make the difference.
There are questions that question reality, morals, life, the universe, and even the metaverse. In a world full of questions, we have the answers. Answers that allow you to do more, be more, believe more. Answers that are born out of insights. Answers that are backed by our purpose to create a participatory ecosystem. We have the answers that help you adapt, create new frameworks, and be agile to disrupt the ever-disrupting world. Yes, we do have the answers, which embrace races, ages, ideologies, and personalities. We have the answers that help you have the answer to outdo your competitors and outperform your potentials. So, when it comes to bringing the best in you or your business, we don't just give you the answers, we become the answer. Answers you can trust will make a world of difference. We are KPMG, knowledge for people, making impact globally.
We have been there. We have done that. Well, it doesn't really stop there. After all, we are KPMG. Every day, we think of more than many ways of doing it better by working together. We have a diverse team of more than 265,000 partners and people across the network. And each day, the number is growing. Each one of us challenging the ordinary. Join us if you are serious about your career.
KPMG's mentorship and support shaped my rewarding career journey.
I started as a trainee. Today, I'm a director. What a proud feeling.
KPMG's diverse projects broadened my career horizons.
Trust us, this will be your dream job if you are ready to challenge your own limits.
Nothing stops me from reaching out to my dreams. The flexible culture at KPMG bridges the gap of family and work.
KPMG enabled me to bring the best version of myself.
There are no barriers here when it comes to thinking, culture or ethnicities. KPMG's values bind us together.
Don't think twice if you are looking for global exposure.
KPMG helped me to discover my true potential by opening a world of opportunities, locally as well as globally.
KPMG is not a place. It's a world where our work culture is seamless and opportunities are limitless.
Be ready to be in the spotlight of the world stage.
Once again, Join us if you are looking for a happy work culture.
At KPMG, we are serious about everything, even when it comes to having fun.
We work hard and enjoy harder. It's all about striking the right balance.
When work becomes fun, who needs a break?
Discover new realms. Explore new paradigms.
Welcome to KPMG.
AI has hit a new inflection point, the rise of AI agents. These systems can act as digital teammates that work with human expertise to pursue goals and operate across complex workflows. Generative AI unlocked insights at scale. Agentic AI is taking the next step, turning insights into intelligent, trusted actions. In KPMG International's Agentic AI Advantage, it estimates that agentic AI alone will be key to unlocking a staggering $3 trillion in corporate productivity improvements. Agentic AI agents can unlock value by expanding the boundaries of automation, 24/7, 365 availability, continuous optimization, and through turning knowledge into action, ensuring humans are in the loop and matching business requirements with the appropriate level of agent to turn insights into intelligent, trusted actions. You can with AI, you can with KPMG. To learn more, download Agentic AI Advantage, unlocking next level value at kpmg.com/agentic AI.
The energy transition isn't just a shift, it's a transformation, one that demands new forms of resilience, adaptability, and value creation. AI is no longer just a tool, it's becoming foundational. It's enabling energy companies to rethink how energy is generated, distributed, and optimized in real time. The goal? Drive efficiency, reduce waste, and create systems that are responsive, intelligent, and sustainable. Investment is following intent. Over 3/4 of energy leaders are scaling up AI spend, with nearly 2/3 increasing it by more than 10%. Why? Because AI is accelerating growth in automation, predictive analytics, and intelligent products, building real business value. As the industry navigates the trilemma of security, sustainability, and affordability, the question is no longer if AI plays a role, but how it enables energy organizations to not only optimize, but evolve. How do you design an organization that can lead, not just optimize? You can with AI. You can with KPMG. Discover the blueprint for energy organizations at kpmg.com/intelligent energy.
Re. Two simple letters, seemingly insignificant when standing alone. Yet, together, they hold the power to reshape entire landscapes. Add re to a word, and it transcends its meaning, because re doesn't just signify repetition, it symbolizes renewal. It means to rise again, to rethink, to rekindle, to redefine. As a nation, we have been tested, but within every challenge lies a chance to reclaim growth, to reimagine possibilities, to restore opportunities. And in this moment of reawakening, insight becomes our spark, knowledge our compass, and clarity our path forward. This is where we reimagine tomorrow, where analysis meets action, where decisions shape destiny. KPMG Annual Budget Analysis 2026, Reviving Growth, Rebuilding Trust.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Reviving Growth and Rebuilding Trust. Ladies and gentlemen, this is KPMG's budget analysis for 2026. Just a short while ago, and in fact, it is possibly still going on, President Anurukumara Dissanayake presented his second budget reading, second budget for Sri Lanka. And in Parliament today, ladies and gentlemen, many fiscal and policy proposals were presented to perhaps lead the country towards economic revival. Now, we all know, and we have all watched Sri Lanka being hit by a series of economic shocks. But slowly but surely, Sri Lanka is now on the path towards revival and rebuilding trust by all involved, not just within Sri Lanka, but all its international stakeholders as well. Following that theme, today, the KPMG Budget Analysis 2026 has gathered many panelists, experts in the various industries and from the upper echelons of government itself, to analyze the budget proposals hot off the press and tell you the direction that Sri Lanka is going towards, while keeping in mind that we are reviving growth and rebuilding trust, not just with our local stakeholders, but with the international community at large. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you Managing Partner for KPMG Sri Lanka, Mr. Priyanka Jayatilaka, who is with me this evening. Sir, if you could please present to our audience the opening remarks and perhaps the underline and the emphasis for this year's budget analysis.
Thank you, Nipuni. Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to KPMG's budget analysis for the fiscal year 2026, Reviving Growth and Rebuilding Trust, based on the national budget presented by His Excellency the President Anurukumara Dissanayake at the Parliament this afternoon. I think it's still going on. I think we will catch up as we go on the latest budget presentations. This evening, we intend to analyze and cover some of the critical aspects of the budget, such as government fiscal policy and direction. Be mindful that this is the second year of NPP government in office, and certainly there will be corrections of their policies and way forward. So with that, also we will be looking at IMF reforms and its impact on our economy, a very important aspect of our economy at this moment, and government revenue generation, particularly through inland revenue and customs. These also to ensure, I'm sure the respective officials will talk about how they intend to minimize the revenue leakage, as well as as well as look at how to maximize the tax net, which is also extremely important. I think also is coming from IMF proposals. We also will be discussing about the investment attraction through the port city, as well as increasing the export revenue through Export Development Board. Also, the funding for investments and expansion of operation through banking sector is also equally important. We are looking at economy where we are looking at growth. Also, we are looking at digital economy and technology transforming, particularly as His Excellency the President mentioned at the Parliament. There are a lot of incentives being thrown or offered to digital development, including AI. So I think hopefully we would see that some of the government institutions, particularly who are providing services, would improve their service levels and minimize the revenue leakage as well as minimize or maximize the ease of doing business in this country. We also have a specialist to talk about transformation of energy sector, particularly into renewable energy, and where we have a target for 2030 to achieve 70% of energy generation from renewable sector. So we have three panel discussions lined up for you, along with keynote speeches. I hope our budget analysis 2026, reviving growth and rebuilding trust, and views of our expert panels would be insightful for all of you. So with that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our keynote speakers, Honorable Minister of Labour and Deputy Minister of Finance, Finance and Planning, Secretary to the Ministry of Finance, our eminent panelists, Deputy Minister of Digital Economy, former Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Chairman of Export Development Board, Commissioner of Inland Revenue, and Director General of Customs Department. And we also have CEOs representing various sectors for accepting our invitation to be part of our event. Thank you, and thank you very much, and joining us for a thought-provoking event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jayatilaka. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard a number of key words that was very important and that will probably be elucidated when we do our budget analysis over the next couple of hours. In fact, it is my pleasure now to invite and to introduce our next presenter, who is Principal Tax and Regulatory at KPMG in Sri Lanka, Ms. Rifka Ziad. She has, just in the boardroom of KPMG, sat down and prepared what would be the national budget insights for the budget presentations for 2026. And she is ready to give you an overview of what has currently been presented in Parliament and set the tone for this evening's set of discussions. Over to you, Rifka.
Thank you, Nipuni. Good evening, everyone. It's indeed my privilege to be analyzing the budget, and one of those moments where the national budget is still being read. So some of the proposals we will be giving you hot off the oven, let me put it that way. So as you already know, it is the 80th national budget, and it's a second budget under the current government. And right now, the Honorable President is presenting the budget. So one of the key tones of the budget as we listen to him is something which goes with our tagline. It is for reviving growth, rebuilding trust. It talks about a lot of the efforts that has happened in the recent past in relation to strengthening the governance aspect. It also goes on to talk about anti-corruption measures, and I think the President is standing by his objective of digitalization. So I think something all of y'all would be waiting for would be to see, okay, what about taxes? You would recall the President a few months ago did say that there's not going to be any new taxes. Let us look at a checklist. He stood by his word, no new taxes, but of course there are tax reforms. He never said that there won't be tax reforms. So although there were talks around property tax, maybe a wealth tax and so on, there are no new taxes introduced, but of course there are tax reforms in place. Let me take you through those a bit. And of course digitalization has been a key highlight throughout the budget speech while he's speaking right now. And of course there's a lot of proposals in relation to creating a conducive investment climate, which I think is warmly welcome because Sri Lanka does have a very low FDI. I think it's about 2.5% of the GDP. So I think investment climate attracting FDIs is very important to Sri Lanka. And so these are a basic checklist of things that you can be assured of. So let's look at certain stats because I think it's the statistics that put things into order. So estimated total government revenue is 5,305 billion, and out of that the tax revenue is 4,850 billion. So if you look at the government expenditure, of course it's a mammoth 8,980 billion. So you can do the math, it is anyway a deficit. Out of these 8,980 billion, for debt servicing alone, there's 4,495 billion that has been allocated for. So let's look at what is our budget deficit. So our budget deficit is 5.2% is the budget deficit. Of course, we have been in much worse positions as well. So the estimated economic growth, which is very interesting, is estimated at 7%, which I think is I'm sure our economic analysis in the first panel would go to talk about whether the 7% growth rate is realistic and whether it should be much higher. The debt to GDP ratio, I think, is being reduced or is estimated to reduce to 95%, and the primary surplus is at 2.3% of the GDP. The government revenue as a percentage of GDP is 16%, and the President did proudly say that it was around 8% few years ago. So in that case, we are looking at like a high 100% increase. The foreign reserves is estimated to be around $7 billion, which is a very important number for us. And I think the inflation, it's a single digit inflation. And he did mention in the budget speech that it would be maintained around less than 5%. So that's something for us to look forward to. So what I've tried to do in the next few slides is to try to kind of group it into different topics so that it might be easier for you to pick what the proposal is about. Of course, like I said, since the budget speech is still going, there would be certain proposals I will be telling you, it may not be on the slide. So as far as investment climate is concerned, we saw that an Investment Protection Act would be introduced, and I think this is something that the IMF also has put in place as part of their reforms, which is very important. A single point system to be introduced for investors. This has been spoken about for some time, and I think if this can be done now, I think that's the need of the hour. IT zones to be established under the BOI. They spoke of Digana, Nuwara, and we also saw that Colombo Port City Commission Act would be amended, and tourist residence visa systems to be introduced. Along with that, we also, if you talk about digitalization, a digital asset declaration system is to be introduced. I think with a lot of talk around digital assets, this has been introduced. So we need to see more clarity as to how this would be processed. We also saw, which is again, it would be digitalization and part of investment, virtual economic zones to be established, which we need to, this would be, I think, a new concept as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. Although this is there in globally, if you look at other jurisdictions, this concept is there, but for Sri Lanka it may be new. So we need to see how they are going to explore that. E-procurement systems to be launched, and also there is a reference to e-invoicing as well. As part of the digitalization process, I think that is something that is being driven. And from a tax perspective, I think e-invoicing is something we need to look into, especially with the VAT regime. It's very important that now, as today's global initiatives are, that we do move into e-invoicing. And the RAMIS version, I think it is to be upgraded to version 3.0. So that is something we should await. It is part of the tax administration. But of course, because it's digitalization, we thought we'll speak about it here. And this is interesting. Of course, we have our NICs, we have our TINs. Now there's a digital identity card system to be introduced from March 2026. And of course, the President did speak in detail about digitalization of government institutions. Let's talk about the tax revenue. I think this is something a lot of you would be interested. So the tax revenue has been, what is estimated is 4,910 billion. What we had is 4,725. If you see, the increase is only about 4%, and this is in, if you take the absolute terms, it's a 4% increase. But if you look at a tax to GDP, what we see is it's 14.8% as of 2025, but estimate for 2026 is a drop. It's 14.2. We just need to verify if the numbers are right, because I actually expected it to be a little bit of an increase, but it seems to be, it's a drop when you take tax to GDP. So we need to watch out on that. So if you look at what is the composition of this 4,910, so what we've done here is it's mainly from income tax, taxes on goods and services. So income tax, if you see, it's 25% is the composition as far as 2026 is concerned, while 62% is from taxes on goods and services, and 12% is on tax on external trade. So if you do look at from 2025 to 2026, of course we do have an expert panel, but let me just put some points which can be taken up for discussion. From external trade, if you see 2025, it's 652 billion, which has dropped to 644. I'm just wondering whether, because 2025 was one of those years where we had high tax revenue from motor vehicles, maybe is that the reason why it has been reduced to 644. And of course, you don't see much of a difference as far as income tax is concerned. So the majority still remains with taxes on goods and services. So that is your VAT, SSCL and all other taxes. So let's look at the tax proposals. Enhanced capital allowance, as you know, is a relief that is being given based on your investments in fixed assets. And that at the moment was available for anyone who was investing for more than USD 3 million. And the percentage was 100% or 200% if you are investing in the northern province or any other province, it was 100%. So what they have done is they have reduced the 3 million to $250,000, which is warmly welcome, because now this would encourage SME sector also to invest in fixed assets. The budget also makes a reference to the SVAT system. It's abolished and it's replaced with the VAT refund system. So I think the budget has been done on the basis that the SVAT is replaced. And of course, talks about the RAMIS being upgraded. Like I said, tax administration is being strengthened with digitalization. The President also speaks of converting the direct to indirect ratio, which is 25 to 75, to 40 to 60. But if you ask me whether do you have any proposals here which would convert it the direct to 40? Not right now, not this year. I think it seems to be a bit of a more longer term plan. Treasury to publish a list on businesses enjoying tax exemption. So that is something they are putting it across. I think maybe these could be tax exemptions which are coming under the STP, Colombo Port City. So they are going to have a list, and also Colombo Port City Commission Act and the Strategic Development Project Act would be amended to streamline tax concessions, and this is part of the IMF proposals as well, where they have said that you need to streamline tax exemptions, and therefore we can expect certain changes here. In addition to that, which is not here in the slide, you need to keep in mind the registration threshold for VAT and SSCL has been brought down from 60 million to 36 million effective from 1st April 2025, and something you may not like, but SSCL has been introduced on vehicles at the time of imports or manufacture, and customs duty tariff you must be used to 0%, 15 and 20%. It has been changed to 0, 10, 20 and 30%, but effective from April 2026. This is in line to accommodate the removal of para tariffs. So you would see tariffs like cess would be reduced, and then custom duty would be introduced with the new rate. And of course, so these were some of the new proposals that came in, and there is an imposition of VAT and SSCL on imported coconut oil and palm oil as well. Other proposals are to strengthen private-public partnership, funds to be allocated to SME development, poverty alleviation, and low-income earners to be looked after is spoken throughout in the budget, and elimination of corruption. Taking anti-corruption measures is also spoken about a lot, and of course SMEs there has a lot of thought on SMEs, which is I think warmly welcome. So SME institutions are going to be reorganized and brought under the Industrial Development Board, because there are many associations now. They are trying to bring everyone together. So with that, I think I'll conclude my set of proposals, and we look forward to the panel discussing these proposals much more in detail. Over to you, Nipuni. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Rifka. Ladies and gentlemen, by Rifka's amazing presentation, just keeping up with the budget as it is being read in Parliament, I've just witnessed that there are several proposals, a sweeping focus on the digital economy, and of course investment promotion. There is a definite drive towards SME revival and SME involvement in economic revival. Now, in keeping with that theme, reviving growth and rebuilding trust, ladies and gentlemen, we have organized, as promised, several panel discussions with industry leaders and heads of various government authorities and departments, as well as ministers. So we have a cross-section of experts to discuss the various proposals and the general direction in which Budget 2026 is taking Sri Lanka. Now, one of the main focuses is rebuilding trust. And to rebuild trust, we have to present ourselves to the world as a trustworthy and a stable and growing economy. On that note, our first panel is focused on Sri Lanka's economic reset, the Budget 2026, and the road to investment and export growth. Interesting topics indeed, and topics of the hour, ladies and gentlemen. I have with us our first panel, of course, in keeping with our focus on digital economy. We have a hybrid panel, some joining from KPMG Sri Lanka itself, and some of our eminent panelists joining virtually. So without further ado, may I introduce our panel, starting with our moderator, partner and Chief Operating Officer of KPMG in Sri Lanka, Mr. Suren Rajakaria. Good evening. We also have with us, ladies and gentlemen, our eminent panelists for this session, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy former governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, who has joined us virtually. Thank you, sir. Good evening, or good day to you. I understand you are joining from overseas. We have Mr. Mangala Vijayasinghe, Chairman, CEO of the Sri Lanka Export Development Board, also joining us virtually. Thank you very much. I have with us here in our studio Mr. Revan Wickramasuriya, Director General of the Colombo Port City Economic Commission. Good evening. And Mr. Hasit Premathilaka, Managing Director, Haley's Fentons Limited, member of the Group Management Committee of Haley's PLC. An eminent panel drawn from industry leaders as well as experts in policy. Over to you, Mr. Rajakarya, as you present, I'm sure, some very tough questions to our panel.
Thank you, Nipuni. Good evening, everyone who are joining the virtual forum. It's a privilege to host today's panel discussion on the National Budget of Sri Lanka 2026, a topic that touches every household, every business, and every aspiration for our country's future. This year's budget arrives at a pivotal moment as Sri Lanka continues its journey to economic recovery, fiscal reform, social resilience. The choices we make today will shape the trajectory of tomorrow. Our goal this evening is not just to analyze the allocations, but to unpack the implications on livelihoods, on businesses, on governance, and the everyday lives of our citizens. As already introduced, this session is about Sri Lanka's economic reset and road to investment and export growth. So we're going to focus only on those aspects during this session. We're fortunate to be joined by a distinguished panel of experts who bring perspectives from policy, economics, and business. Now let's dive into the session. First of all, I'm going to invite Dr. Kumaraswamy for his views. But before doing that, let me present findings from a poll conducted by KPMG with regard to this budget. And we asked people what should be Sri Lanka's top priority to sustain growth through 2030. And people were allowed to vote. Results are, coincidentally the same expected by everybody. I'm sure Dr. Kumaraswamy would also comment on this. So over to you, a question to you, Dr. Kumaraswamy. IPS in Sri Lanka said GDP growth of 4.9% in the first half of 2025 reflected the outcomes of a steady and predictable policy environment. However, it noted that sustaining this momentum would depend on structural reforms, particularly in land and labor markets, and greater openness to trade and investment to improve resource allocation. Can we understand your views in greater depth with all your experience in managing our economy some time ago as to how the country can sustain a growth momentum to reach our macroeconomic targets set for 2030? You may, I guess, select on debt sustainability, export to GDP, or tax revenue to GDP as Rifa just commented. Over to you, Dr. Kumaraswamy, for your first comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rajakarya. Let me also thank KPMG for inviting me to be a participant in this webinar. The first thing to say is that Sri Lanka has achieved a remarkable turnaround in the last 3 years. And one must also commend the government. If you look at I haven't seen the final budget, obviously, but when you look at the appropriation bill, the government has been pretty successful in diverting resources to some of its priority areas like health, education, social protection, agricultural modernization, and in particular digitalization, without breaking the IMF framework. So it's been a pretty well-crafted budget in my view. Now, one note of caution before I go on, and that is, we've been having close to 5% growth for several quarters now, but that needs to be interpreted carefully because there have been a couple of very strong tailwinds which are transitory in nature. Initially, as the economy transited from contraction to growth, there were very strong base effects for the four quarters after that transition took place. Then more recently, as import restrictions were released, there was a boost to capacity utilization. Both these things are transitory, and by the time the level of GDP reaches its level at the time of the inception of the crisis, we won't have these kind of tailwinds to support our growth. So after that, you have to get new investment. That's the critical thing. You'll have to increase the capital stock to drive growth at 5% beyond. So what is being done? And here again, there is some room for optimism. Just listening to the introductory remarks made by your KPMG colleague, there are clearly a number of initiatives which are focused on trying to improve the investment climate and to improve investment promotion, which is highly desirable. Now, one other point to make is that growth can be driven through two sources. One is labor augmentation. That is increasing the number of people in different sectors, which adds to output. Sri Lanka no longer has that option open to it simply because of our demographic dynamics. So all the growth has to come from the other source, which is increasing productivity. So it's critical that we increase productivity and raise the potential rate of growth to 5% and beyond. The IMF at the moment seems to think that the potential rate of growth is about 3 or a little over 3%. I do not agree with such a low figure, but certainly we need to make sure we get it above 5%, and for that we need to undertake a number of reforms, which the government seems to be giving priority to. The second thing is debt sustainability that you mentioned, and here debt sustainability can, the key metric is debt as a percent of GDP, and we're trying to get to 95%. We have got a little bit of a head start because growth has been higher than in the debt sustainability analysis, and borrowing has been less than in the debt sustainability analysis. So the debt to GDP number has improved more than expected. So this is what we need to do. Make sure that the numerator, which is the stock of debt, and the denominator, which is the GDP, exceed the numbers given in the debt sustainability analysis. And that is possible. We've made a good start, but we need to sustain that. But the other point to make is 95% of GDP, which is seen as the end point of the debt consolidation, is still a very high figure. 70% would be a more stable figure. So we need to go beyond that and get up and really to push the numerator up and the denominator up and the numerator down by reducing the debt stock. On the exports, there are people who are more knowledgeable than me on that. The main thing we have to do is to make sure that we remove the anti-export bias in our policy mix. We need to reduce protection, and the para-tariffs like PAL and the cessors have kept us out of global supply chains. So those kind of reforms which have been talked about need to be affected. And people talk about fiscal dominance in monetary policy. There's also been fiscal dominance in trade policy, because the main reason why these destructive para-tariffs have not been taken off is because of revenue reasons. So we need to make sure we get away from that. And on the last thing you mentioned was tax revenue. And here we need to, it's well known what we need to do, and the government is working on it. And we've seen a significant increase in revenue as a percent of GDP. Let me stop there. I've taken up a lot of time. Thank you.
We could still listen to you along, Dr. Kumaraswamy. I mean, based on your knowledge.
Can I make one point? Yes. It's crucial that we move from debt fuel growth in non-tradables to an FDI-driven, export-driven growth. That transformation, we have to change our growth model, and that's critical.
So, valid points. I mean, we're going to talk more about FDIs and export growth during the session with two more experts on the area. I think you've covered a lot of those areas, but just to ask you again, how can Sri Lanka balance between these IMF-driven policies with the need to stimulate domestic investment and consumption. It's a follow-up. You've covered some of the structural reforms, Dr. Kumaraswamy, but I was wondering whether there is anything where we can balance these IMF-driven policies to stimulate domestic investments and consumption. Any views on that?
Well, by definition, the IMF comes into a country when there are major imbalances in the economy. Usually, fiscal imbalances and BOP imbalances are unsustainable. So they have to basically compress domestic absorption. That is really investment plus consumption has to be reduced to cope with the overheating of the economy that has led to the unsustainability. So that will be the first phase, and Sri Lanka has done that remarkably well. We have stabilized the economy extremely well. Now the time has come to focus on the structural reforms to get the growth side of it. Now, in an ideal world, you need to do both side by side. But in practice, no government, I would say, has the bandwidth to do both at the same time. No government in Sri Lanka or abroad is able to do both these things, both the stabilization and the structural reforms for growth at the same time that I know of. So now that we've done the stabilization, created the platform, we need to go hell for leather in terms of boosting, getting the growth framework strengthened and driving sustainable growth, inclusive growth, and also ideally sustainable growth.
Okay. So thank you, Doctor. I think let's see whether we can align those thoughts with the rest of the panel. Going on to Mr. Mangala Vijayasinghe, because we're talking of export growth again. We again conducted another poll with our business community on which area should Sri Lanka prioritize in terms of export diversification. And we have the results, I think, on the screen. To expand exports and build long-term economic resilience, basically our audience identified export diversification as the largest component and SME development in the, in the second place. So there is a general opinion, Mr. Vijayasinghe, that Sri Lanka's limited export diversification and narrow production base have constrained the country from fully capitalizing the benefits of GSP plus trade facility with the EU. Because we have around, I think, 6,000 tariff lines available for us, but we use probably about 54 is the general view. So therefore, it appears diversifying the export portfolio is more important than ever, considering risks highlighted by recent incidents like the US tariff debacle and heavy reliance on tradable traditional exports such as tea and garments. What do you think is the government's strategy on export diversification, and what support can exporters expect from the government, and how will these budget proposals help them to get there? Over to you.
Suren, thank you very much. You and KPMG team inviting Export Development Board to host a budget discussion today. Before going to your key questions, so I want to give some brief introduction about Export Development Board and our expected targets for the next 5 years. So in order to get some good understanding about our audience. So basically, Export Development Board is the premier organization promoting and developing the export sector in Sri Lanka. And basically, we have to play a big key roles, mainly for the policy advisory and the monetary role, and we have to promote our exporters. And also, we have to facilitate export with the key stakeholders, and also, especially for the SME sector, we have to provide the knowledge partner. Based on that, you know that Sri Lanka vision, export development vision is to position Sri Lanka as a prominent export hub for exclusive product and services. To achieve this through strategic pillars like diversification, our market products and services, enhancing capacity development, and attracting high quality export-led foreign investment. So we are committed to have a positive growth path. C. The proposed budget is a critical tools accelerate this program. Today, when we listen to our budget, even you can see they have allocated reasonable budget for the Sri Lanka export sector. Because when you look into Sri Lanka export sector, so when you look into Sri Lanka foreign income, so export sector represent nearly 60 to 65% from the total revenue, then balance our tourism income and our foreign income, and also from the remittances come from the balance side. So based on that, Export Development Board always talking about the product and the market diversification. So therefore, market diversification is one of the key factor right now we are talking about that. So when you come to the market diversification strategy, mainly the government, our export sector, diversification strategy focuses on de-risking the economy by expanding both product and market through the National Export Development Plan. You know the National Export Development Plan, with the recent budget also they have allocated more than 250 million to further expand in this budget. So Sri Lanka Export Development Board, in partnering with Asian Development Bank, has commenced a serious stakeholders meeting together with our industry leaders, government senior officials, and our foreign delegates to formulating a national development plan, 2025-2029 time period. So this strategic initiatives to strengthen in the country's export competitiveness and drive sustainable economic growth. So this national export development plan, why we need this? I think we want to diversify our export sector. Based on that, we have identified that new development plan is needed. So that is why the new export development plan is designed to achieve 3 core objectives. So one thing is enhancing Sri Lanka trade competitiveness. And the number 2, expanding regional and global market linkage. And also promoting sustainable trade-led economic growth. You know that our previous national export strategy was there. So building upon the foundation of national export strategy, which was implemented in 2018-2022 time period, the new plan incorporates lesson learned from the previous implementation while addressing the evolving global, regional, and domestic trade dynamics. So Export Development Board, our target, we have planned for the next 5 years time period. Our target is to reach 36 billion export revenue. So even 2025 time period, we can see during last 9-month time period, we have reached 7% export growth in the first 9-month time period compared to 2024. And during last 10 years time period, we can see that this growth is very much positive trend. And from this year, from next quarter, I mean that including October, November, and December quarter, we are expecting average 8 to 10% export growth. With that, this year we will be able to end up with in between 17.5, 17.8 billion export revenue in Sri Lanka. So that is a very good positive trend in the Sri Lankan side. So for the next year, we are planning for the more than 20 billion export revenue from both merchandising and the service sector export. So then, in addition to our existing market, so market diversification is very much important. In addition to our existing product portfolio, we have diversified our product range as well. So based on that, we have to do a lot of things to develop our export sector. So with our National Export Development Plan, we have included all our strategies each and every year and the market diversification model as well. So we are in a position to complete this National Export Development Plan by December this year. So based on that, from 2026 onward, we are working with the new export development plan to reach our expected target. You know, right now the export sector Sri Lanka represents nearly 19% from our total GDP. So our first target is to reach 3% of export sector from the GDP by 25% by 2030. So based on that target, we are expanding our both merchandising and the service sector export. And this year budget, we can see that even the SME sector expansion and the innovation, as well as all other infrastructure development, we can see government has included reasonable budget allocation compared with previous years. That is a very much positive trend from the export sector we can discuss. So I will not take much time from UN. There are other panelists are there. Based on the time frame, we can discuss.
Thank you for setting out the growth trajectory for exports and also the National Export Development Plan and your actions around it. Depending on time, we'll come back to analyze a little bit more. But let's also get into foreign direct investments and this big topic which everybody is talking about, Port City. There again, I think we did a internal survey with business community on Port City's global competitiveness and what would be the most important aspects which should be Sri Lanka's, prioritize these aspects in order to attract sustainable FDIs. So the biggest item there is to try and build investor trust. This is what our business community says. And obviously the second one would be to advance policy reforms. Both are, I think, close to your heart, Revan. So let me get to the question first. With obviously these attractive tax incentives which are given, the country has not been successful in attracting large FDIs to the port city. I mean, it's not a secret, right? There are some people advocating a reduction in these tax incentives or elimination of these benefits, which might obviously make matters worse. Many may not even understand the implications of approximately, I think, around 50% or more than 50% of the land is allocated for residential purposes and only about 25% is being allocated for business and the balance 25 is for probably entertainment. Port City asset can be a key component of Sri Lanka's economic reset and we are all hoping for it. What regulatory or policy reforms are needed to make Port City a globally attractive investment hub?
I think very, very thought out questions, Suren, and you're absolutely correct. As your polls also showed, right, to attract FDI, what is it that investors need? What is it that entrepreneurs need? They want a policy, a stable policy, and they need to have trust in the environment they're going to invest in. Having been with the Commission now for 3 years, right, one thing I've realized is we are beginning to see a significant transformation in how investors are looking at us. Yes, we had what some consider significantly large tax incentives for 2 years from 2023 to 2025 August, which expired. Notwithstanding what was seen as significant tax incentives, the investment pool was not there. And the answer to that is what your polls came about with, or polls showed. And this is what we see the government actually beginning to address, right? Recently, as September, they came out with a clearly transparent regulatory framework that addressed the fiscal incentives. And as His Excellency mentioned on the budget speech as well, they are in the process of coming up with improvements, enhancements to the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Act. And these are all around building and improving on the transparency that is needed to address the investor concerns that have been continued to be raised over the last 2 or 3 years that I've been a part of the Commission. And what is needed to attract this FDI and FDI means clearly foreign direct investments, is to create a stable macroeconomic and policy environment. As Dr. Kumaraswamy alluded to, we've seen this exceptional growth coming in. How much of that growth is stimulated by the tailwinds and the base effect is actually very, very clearly evident when you look at the numbers. And what is very clear is if we are going to continue this growth, the structural reforms need to come in. It's positive to see the budget not talking about new taxes or changing tax rates, etc., but talking about the policy reforms, the structural reforms that need to be implemented. The port city clearly can be a catalyst to attracting FDI, right? Clearly this is a state-owned asset. 269 hectares of prime land in the heart of the Colombo business district, right, which is sitting with the government. It is now up to the government to ensure the necessary policy directives are implemented to actually entice investors to come in. What we expect to see coming into next year is further improvements around the frameworks that the government will bring about to entice investors, foreigners to come in and invest and live and work here. Suren, as you mentioned, 50% of this development is expected for residential purposes. So that's in numbers perspective, it is about 5.3 million square meters of floor area that is expected to come up for apartments, condominiums, villas, etc. A balance 2 million for entertainment and retail. So the commission is working actively with the government to identify the policy needed to attract investors into residential spaces and into the retail space. The next pillar, as you touched on, is the commercial space, which is about 25% of the 6.3 million square meters of GFA that's coming in. What is it we need to entice businesses to come in? We talk about bringing in FDI into regional hubs, etc. We need to see what are the reforms that are needed to attract the businesses to come in and establish themselves. Broadly speaking, what we see is for residents to come in, we need further improvements on the visas, and again the budget spoke to improvements and enhancements on the visa framework for foreigners to come in and live and work here. And then on the side or the pillar of addressing the commercial spaces to attract FDI into the commercial spaces, again the visa requirements and also possibly some sort of reforms or ring-fenced environment for foreigners who are to come in and live and work in the port city. So these are a couple of areas that the Commission is actively working with the government to ensure the necessary frameworks are in place to enable the port city to take off and be a catalyst for attracting foreign direct investment into the country.
Okay, so a quick take on that. Labor, I mean, visas are being sorted out, I think, in the budget announcement. Anything you can say about labor and the existing labor environment, whether it will help in getting the foreign investors, or is there some reform required in terms of the Port City Act?
I think when we are talking about getting a foreign company to move their regional headquarters into Sri Lanka and the port city, labor laws are a big factor, right? The concern they keep raising is if they bring in their regional headquarters and they bring in all their employees from overseas, be it Singapore, Malaysia, India, the Middle East, they need some assurances that they do not get caught up. The foreign employees, I'm not talking about the Sri Lankan workers, especially the foreign employees do not get caught up in the extremely complex labor regulations and labor laws in Sri Lanka currently prevailing. And this is something I've heard at many panels, even with your organization as well, that talks about labor reforms. And again, I think the budget had alluded to it, and I think Dr. Kumaraswamy also mentioned, I think the term used is labor augmentation, right? So I think these are areas, if they can be addressed appropriately to meet the requirements of the foreign investors, they can actually significantly move the dial in the FDI numbers.
Okay. Thanks for those clarifications. I'm sure a lot of people are waiting to listen to these changes and see how investments can progress in Sri Lanka in terms of the port city. Let's get to the last section on the thing. We are basically talking of renewable energies, but I think the budget has announced a lot of investments around wastewater, disaster management, environment protection and all that, Hasit. So coming back to you, to your specialist area, what policy reforms or incentives from the budget will help leapfrog to more cleaner technology for energy? And what additional steps are needed to attract more investments into such renewable energy projects, in your view?
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Budget has not given much in a larger, broader way, but I see based on the CEB's long range plan, there's about 23 billion rupees investment in developing grid infrastructure. So why we need grid infrastructure is, when we look at renewable energy, we mainly focus on solar and wind energy, where those wind is available mainly in the Mannar belt, and the solar is available everywhere, but the land is mostly available only in northern and eastern area. So this energy has to be transmitted to the western province where mostly the energy is consumed. For that, right now there are so many investors who've got the land, who have submitted their applications, but unfortunately their applications are not approved because there is no enough grid infrastructure to transmit this energy generated in the north and east. So this is an encouragement. I'm sure there are some loan schemes coming from ADB as well to improve our grid infrastructure. So this has to happen. Then secondarily, say, assuming the grid infrastructure is in place, the next issue comes that solar is available only during the daytime. What's going to happen in the night time, where the biggest energy is consumed only in the night time? So recently, CEB floated a tender for battery energy storage system, so which is about 700 megawatt hours. So it's quite significant, and there were many bidders, and it went at a very, very lower rate. So this means the daytime solar energy can be stored in the battery and can be distributed during the night time. So this is one big step that the government has taken, and we are very appreciative of the government of doing that. And also now there is another incentive, because for any existing solar customer, they can invest in the battery energy storage system and feed it to the grid in the night time at a 45 rupees and 80 cents. So for a large scale investor, it is quite interesting and attractive. The thing is, for renewable energy to develop more, there has to be more incentive and the lead time has to be reduced. So we have a target, the government has a target to have 70% of energy to be generated out of renewable energy by 2030. And also in 2023, based on the e-mobility policy, there is another target of achieving new energy vehicles to be 50% of the vehicles that are imported to the country. And those new energy vehicles also need electricity. And when we come to the larger spectrum of energy, 33% of the total energy consumption in Sri Lanka is for transportation. And electricity is only 12%. So we are talking about 70% of electricity to be generated out of renewable energy. What about the transportation, which is the bigger fish? And every year we spend about $4 billion or $3 to $12 billion of precious forex in importing fossil fuel. So we have abundance of renewable energy in the country, and our Mannar belt has been estimated to have about 60 gigawatts of power, which is, I think, is about 10 times more than what we need here. Okay. So these things have to be, there has to be proper policies in place to encourage this investment because there is enough private sector ready to invest at the given rates right now.
So something's missing, right? There is enough opportunity, there is enough renewable energy, there is enough private sector investment, there are policies.
Yes. So the delay.
What is missing?
What is missing is the delay
okay.
in implementing these actions.
Yeah. So that's the key for this whole discussion. It's we can have a lot of budget announcements, we can have these discussions, but at the end of the day, business has to implement and government has to stand by the announcements and execute whatever policies which has been announced quickly within the next few months. So I'm going to close the session based on the timing, but I would like to take advantage of Dr. Kumaraswamy's experience and knowledge, and thank you again for participating from across the lands. Basically, it is announced as a governance-linked budget. So, I mean, IMF's engagement has been shaping our fiscal discipline, if I may put it in that way. Everything is, like you alluded to, are going as planned or targeted. What do you see as a risk, Dr. Kumaraswamy? Anything pointing out as a risk which we may have to be aware of?
Sorry, it took me a minute to get on.
Can hear you.
I'd like to make 2 points. One on the stabilization program and the other on the structural reforms. The very impressive stabilization that has taken place is closely aligned with the IMF program. And what the IMF involvement has enabled us to do is put in place a new paradigm for macroeconomic management. As you know, historically, repeating bouts of macroeconomic stress has been our undoing. We've had 17 IMF programs, and we go forward and come back each time. But what has happened now is there have been clear frameworks that have been put in, and they have been embedded in law. So let me quickly run through them. One is the Public Finance Management Act, which embeds a primary surplus in the budget, which means you're not adding on to the debt stock every year. Secondly, the Central Bank Act now prohibits various sources of lending to government by the central bank, which results in fiscal dominance and the creation of excess aggregate demand spilling over into inflation and balance of payments pressure. So that's the second pillar. The third pillar is the Public Debt Management Act, whereby we now have a harmonized structure to manage our debt. In the past, there were 3 different institutions within government managing debt. So that now has been replaced by a holistic approach to debt management. And this also means that the central bank no longer has a conflict of interest in managing the part of the government's debt and also trying to keep monetary policy going. On the one hand, they're trying to keep interest rates low for the government. On the other hand, to set monetary policy as required by the circumstances on a data-driven basis. So that's also cleans the act up, cleans the environment up. The third thing, of course, is cost-reflective pricing. That takes pressure off the budget, takes pressure off the state bank's balance sheet, and it has also pushed us into the right instrument for delivering social protection. That is the cash transfers through the Asvasma program, which are much better targeted. There are some improvements still to be made, but it's much better targeted than the untargeted subsidies we had in the past, which actually benefited the non-poor more than the poor. So we've cleaned that up as well. And then the final pillar is the 2 elements. One is the Anti-Corruption Act, which is well aligned with the UN convention, and the 16 recommendations of the IMF's governance diagnostic. You see, in a sense, the corruption is an implicit tax on development. It increases the hurdle rate of return on projects that have to be achieved. It leads to distortion of resources in terms of the projects that are chosen. So all this is now, if you take all this together, this is a far more robust framework for macroeconomic management. And it is really now up to all of us to make sure that this is treated as a public good that needs to be kept and not changed. In the past, we've made some progress on these fronts, but then we would have policy reversal. For instance, between 2015 and 2019, number of these things were being moved forward as part of the previous EFF. But then, with the change in government, everything was reversed. So we need to make sure that doesn't happen. This time, of course, we have it embedded in laws, but laws can be changed, right? With a simple majority, governments can change laws. So now it's up to the whole of society to make sure that that doesn't happen. It's up to all of us to protect this new paradigm.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumaraswamy, and thank you, panelists, Mr. Vijay Singh, Mr. Asit Prematilaka, and Mr. Revan Wickramasurya. I hope the economic reset, which we have discussed so far, would benefit all of us. And let me wrap up this first session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cybersecurity risks are constantly evolving. Meanwhile, companies have a vast estate of users, devices, and data to manage across on-site systems, the cloud, and remote working. That means an expanded attack surface for bad actors and fast-changing rules from regulators. Can you confidently grow your business despite rising cyber threats? KPMG Managed Services can help you boldly seize opportunities, like quickly deploying applications or expanding to new markets. Because you know your critical assets are protected and can quickly bounce back from a security incident. KPMG Managed Services combines advanced technology and experience to take responsibility for detecting and responding to threats in near real time, testing applications for vulnerabilities, and verifying the identity of customers, employees, and other stakeholders. All in an ongoing subscription-based model that can quickly pivot as priorities change. Because cyber threats constantly evolve, and so must your security. KPMG Managed Services. Protect your future. Expand your possibilities.
Welcome back to Reviving Growth and Rebuilding Trust, KPMG's budget analysis for the budget proposals 2026. You've just viewed the first panel of eminent speakers, panelists drawn from both government, industry experts, and ladies and gentlemen, they have just discussed, along with Mr. Suren Rajakaria, our moderator, how Sri Lanka's economic reset is going to take place, along with the new budget proposals and the general direction of economic reset that the government hopes to take Sri Lanka on. However, with every budget reading, one of the most important items of focus is fiscal policy. And the fiscal policy is, of course, a view of the taxation and just how much the taxation policies will affect Sri Lanka and its view to reviving growth and rebuilding trust. I have with me an entire panel of experts in that respect. Our next panel is going to discuss revenue, reform, and resilience. Taxation Insights from Budget 2026, which is going to be moderated by our own Principal Head of Tax and Regulatory for KPMG Sri Lanka, Mr. Suresh Pereira. Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, we will also be joined virtually by Mr. Dhananath Fernando, Chief Executive Officer of the think tank Advocata. Thank you very much. I also have Mr. A.M. Nafeel, Senior Commissioner, Inland Revenue Department. Thank you very much for being here. We also have from the KPMG tax team, Partner Tax and Regulatory at KPMG Sri Lanka, Mr. Hasita Radella, and also the lady who just gave you the budget insights not too long ago, about an hour ago. So she has all the news hot off the press, Ms. Rifka Sayad, Principal Tax. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I will hand over to Suresh to take over and discuss the tax reforms.
Yeah, thank you, Nipini. So, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, everybody. And in this session, we are going to discuss tax, and tax. We expected taxation, many tax reforms to be in the budget proposals, but then, as Rifka pointed out in her opening presentation, we don't see many tax proposals in this budget proposal. As Honorable President once a few weeks back announced, there are no new taxes introduced. But that does not mean that there are no interesting things to talk about from the point of view of taxation. Yes, there are. For instance, we do have a measure that broadens the tax base, that is the reduction of the threshold, registration threshold applicable for the VAT, which is currently at 60 million per year to 36 million per year, and that follows the SSEL reform also. Currently also in relation to social security contribution levy, the registration threshold is 60 million, and that is also being brought down to 36 million. And I believe this is going to be the single most measure that would hit the market, that would have an impact in the market with regard to the taxation stemming from this set of budget proposals. Having said that, we also see there are many administrative reforms from the point of view of tax administration, as well as tax concessions also. So to talk about these things in detail, we'll turn to our guest in this audience, in this forum today, the Senior Commissioner from the Inland Revenue Department, Mr. Nafeel. So my first question to you, Mr. Nafeel, is what is your take with regard to from this budget? No taxes, I said.
Thank you, Mr. Suresh Pereira. Every year it is, once this budget is presented, you can see tax as a key component in the budget, but this time you are getting very little changes in the tax policy. In fact, if we summarize that one, as you said, this reduction of VAT registration and SSEL registration threshold, that is, as you said, from 60 million to 36 million. That is one major change, in fact, which lead to enhance the tax base. And the second change is removal of few exemptions. One is the removal of exemption of social security contribution levy on vehicle importation. That was already there. Then subsequent to the sale, that was there. But this time they are going to remove that SSEL, then reintroduce the SSEL at the point of importation, as well as they are going to remove the SSEL at the point of sale. So it's a very good message or news to the vehicle importers and sellers, because they can simply calculate that their cost before they make it sell. Then the third one is removal of exemption of VAT and SSCL on the importation of palm oil and the coconut oil, because earlier the palm oil and coconut oil was subjected to special commodity levy. Now they are going to remove that one and reintroduce this VAT and SSCL in order to maintain the level play fielding with the domestic oil manufacturers. Then finally the change is with respect to investment, because once you go through with the Inland Revenue Act, so any investment more than 3 million, that should be the minimum 3 million US dollars, is subjected to enhanced capital allowances. Now they are going to reduce in order to attract more investment somewhere in the level of medium scale investment, to bring down that investment amount to 250,000 USD. Then they will get 100% capital allowance on their capital assets investment. Those are the major few changes introduced. By this change, as I said already, the first one, the reduction of the registration threshold, will bring number of VAT and SSCL files. So the VAT base going to be enhanced. By that, I think the government can collect its targeted revenue of 2026 by collecting as SSCL and the VAT, as well as certain suppliers who are supplying now without issuing the VAT invoice. Now they are compelled to issue VAT invoice, because the small suppliers also liable to pay their VAT and SSCL, so they will compel to get their purchase invoices, which will help to improve the tax revenue as well as their tax revenue by way of VAT and SSCL and by way of income tax. That is the hope of 2026 budget, I think. In addition to other administrative changes, as you said, the change in the RAMIS 3.0, I think you are aware, RAMIS 1.0 was originally crafted and implemented with the Inland Revenue Act number 10 of 2006. Subsequently, that particular law amended and renamed as Inland Revenue Act number 24 of 2017. For that, the RAMIS 2.0 was brought in. Now there is a little bit change in that arena and going to be named as RAMIS 3.0, in which in that changes we can hope e-invoicing, point of sale machine introductions, API based invoicing system, all these changes come into place with RAMIS 3.0. That's all I think for the change of 2026 budget we can summarize in the view of taxing. Thank you.
Right, I think you missed the most important point from your point. They are going to relocate all the branches of the Inland Revenue Department to a single location. Right, so having said that, let me turn to Dhanarth Fernando. We call him Dana, all of us call him Dana. Let me ask him, what is your first take before we dig deep into the budget proposals, Dana?
The good thing is, as the Commissioner mentioned, there are no major changes on the tax policy, because that helps on the stability point of view. At the same time, as we all know, the government is looking to enhance the tax revenue, because there's already an IMF target and an indication, and in fact, that we have to reach to 15.4% approximately as a percentage of GDP to unlock that governance linked bond. So we basically have to pace up the tax collection with the GDP growth if President and the Finance Minister expects to increase it by about 7%. So overall, stability wise, it's good. Bringing the tax threshold down, I mean, there are two sides. Of course, the one complaint could be from the small and medium enterprises that now they have the process. But the flip side is, generally when you have a level playing field, when you have the similar kind of taxes across the board, that the impact on the relative prices is minimum. For example, in the current context, if you buy chicken from a supermarket, likely that will have applicable of VAT. But if you buy the chicken from pretty much outside the supermarket at a normal polar, then likely it may not have VAT. But at the same time, fish may not liable for VAT. So when you have like different VAT on different place of the location and different thresholds, basically you distort the market because pretty much you are competing in the same protein market. So when you have a VAT across the board, that's in a way better. But of course, I can understand some small and medium micro enterprises may have a complaint on that. But overall, level playing field is it is better, and also VAT is in terms of administration, which is better compared to collecting taxes and imposing new taxes. So in that front, it is good. Overall budget, I think they're expecting to raise about 200 billion additionally compared to the estimate of 2025, and the budget deficit is expected to slightly increase as a percentage of GDP compared to the estimates of 2025. My only worry would be, as we all know, we are also slowly moving out from the IMF program next year, the year after. So when we increase the budget deficit, we have to be quite cautious that we will not move back to the same, I call the habits of the hearts, that we slowly move out and then completely change everything and go for quite an extravagant spending pace, because ultimately that has to be captured again either through taxes or either through debt or through inflation. So that's my initial overall take, Suresh, on the budget and overall on the taxes.
Yeah, with regard to the comment you made about the reduction of the threshold and the general public will not be happy. Yes, when you look at the VAT theory, for a VAT mechanism to be properly effective, most of the industries, most of the commercial activities should be liable to VAT. If it is not, then there's the distortion that you mentioned taking place. Right. I will trace the history with regard to this VAT threshold. Somewhere in I think 1998, when the GST was introduced, the VAT threshold was 12.5, and in 2019 also it was the threshold was 12 million per year, and then it went up to 300 million with the reforms that took place in 2019, and from there it came down to 60 million, and from 60 million now it is going back to 36 million. So compared to the previous thresholds, that is the 12 million, I think 36 million is still high. So having said that, I will turn to my colleague Hasita to ask this question. As we said, okay, this is a set of budget proposals without no taxes, no new taxes as was promised, but at the same time, Hasita, there is a generation of new tax revenue. How is that happening? How do you think this no tax budget will reshape the tax landscape in Sri Lanka?
Okay. Now, as Janana said, if there are no taxes, that means it's a good thing for the country. As a citizen, we are happy. That shows that there's a stability. But the thing is, if you see this budget, government has said they plan to increase tax revenue, income tax revenue by around 8.5%, and indirect tax revenue by 3%. So then there are no new tax proposals also. I know that VAT on digital services will be implemented from 1st April 2026, but there are no good tax proposals here except VAT new thing like threshold reduction. Now I think from tax department side, they have to do more to get additional revenue. Otherwise, they cannot meet these targets, because we have from IMF side also there are targets. So to do that, I think Indian revenue will focus on audits. In this same budget, there is a proposal to introduce new audit system also. But, and also they say like risk-based audit system will be introduced. So that's good. That's good. Like Indian Revenue has limited resources, so they can allocate those resources for real audits without like targeting volumes. So that will be effective. But my worry is now if you see last year we have faced a lot of tax audits, right? So during those audits, like Indian Revenue started reviewing all the documents. Like they are not happy with only the income tax return, so they go to financial statement, ledger, and also the supporting documents and agreements. So then taxpayers have to like submit a lot of information to support their positions. So that will be very costly, lengthy, and administratively burdensome. So I think in the coming years, like taxpayers will have to face that issue. So to avoid that, as a tax planning strategy, I think taxpayers should have proper accounting system. Right? So that will help. That will help taxpayers to like solve their whatever queries, like if they.
Right. So basically, what you are pointing out is, though there are no new taxes introduced here, the tax revenue is to be collected by efficient administration. So we also talk about digitalization of the country's activities. So in that context, where do we find the tax processes, tax procedures in Sri Lanka being digitalized here? Now, as we all know, basically nowadays we have to file the income tax return online, we have to file corporate or income manual, and the payments also could be made online. But is there a gap? What are the gaps that the digitalization or the the electronic things can expedite in Sri Lanka, the tax administration?
Okay. So there are a lot of proposals, two proposals in the budget speech also. I think we addressed that before. Now I think more than that, I'll prefer to discuss the implementation part. At the Indian revenue level, like I think there are law is there and implementation is happening, not in all the areas, but I think going forward, if Indian revenue can like conduct interviews with the taxpayers and also like hearing or administrative reviews with the taxpayers online, that will save time and there will be proofs also, and also there are a lot of benefits. So that is from Indian revenue side, but I think there should be an improvement in the tax appeal commission level also, because tax appeal commission we make all the submissions manually, we meet them manually, like physically. So that
right.
If the
I will take one question to Dana. Dana, if I ask the question, 2026 budget, how would you measure the success or otherwise of that in the future? What are the indicators that you will be looking at?
So I would be mainly looking at the policy direction provided to grow the economy, because ultimately what we need is to grow the economy, and without adding too much pressure on investments, and also when it comes to the business environment. So in that sense, I think my initial sentiment is President has, as the Finance Minister has he has given a lot of emphasis on the policy framework and the stability which he delivered at the initial part of the speech to give a signaling that the economy is stable, but at the same time, most of the proposals which were in the previous budget or like this year's February budget has been somewhat repeated. For an example, on state-owned enterprises, the public-private partnership, protecting the investors, and bringing legislation for that. So those has been basically again reiterated, which is a good signal. When it comes to revenue collection, I think since anyway there was an initial indication given that there will be no taxes, so it's a matter of like how are you going to improve it. So probably more weightage coming to the Indian Revenue Department on improving tax administration. But I would ideally, what I ideally would like to see is as an area for improvement, what proposals in the budget to actually improve the tax administration. The main proposal that I saw, because it's just quite still fresh and early, that bringing all the branches and offices to basically one location rather than that, and also the RAMIS 3.0 system. But in terms of capacity development, what can be done? I think what we have heard was there was some staff shortages, talent shortages in the department to execute and improve the administration. What can be done on that aspect? Because ultimately it seems it's bringing the threshold down is the main reform in terms of when it comes to taxes. So that I would like to see as an area for improvement when it comes to taxes.
Right. I'll turn to my colleague Rifka Siad. So there are very few things with regard to the taxes in this budget, but is there anything that you would like to particularly focus on, Rifka?
Yeah, I think one important thing is something new as far as Sri Lanka tax laws are concerned is the fact that if you see, most of the implementation dates are from April next year. As you know, in Sri Lanka, most of the taxes are either as of today it's implemented or it is retrospective. But if you see, most of the key, even the VAT registration thresholds, even the SSCL on motor vehicles is effective from April 2026, which I think will go in line with what Dhananath also said about consistency. I think this is what developed countries also would do. You know in advance what are the tax changes. Of course, whether some people are going to misuse it is a different question altogether, but giving room in advance in time. And I think a little bit more broader into the para tariff removals, I think we need to think of, because this is something in line with the World Trade Organization. Sri Lanka has been trying to remove para tariffs for some time. And I think along with this, we see that the national tariff policy has now changed. So there's a change in the custom tariff, so your customs collection would increase, and of course other para tariffs like cess, excise duty taxes will reduce. So I think if you see a lot of going in line with IMF reforms can be seen, Suresh, because in relation to even SDP Act and Port City Act, I think the exemptions are being rationalized, so all of that also has been discussed. Suresh, if I just ask you a question, I'm going to just change the table a bit here. You've been kind of talking and I think writing in relation to this about taxing areas which are not taxed. So you broad base in a style where new taxpayers are brought in. And I think something you've spoken about is, I think, cryptocurrencies. But in general, Suresh, do you see anything in this set which is at least aligns towards that? Or do you think we are still cutting the same cake here?
Yeah, good question, or rather good point there. So as all of you all know, basically I have been pushing for the express legislation for taxation of cryptocurrency. As many people point out, we should not be taxing the same people, and that's something that I think all of us will agree. So at the same time, in Sri Lanka, we do find there are many areas where taxes have not been imposed, or taxes are imposed, but taxes are not being collected, and that one area is cryptocurrency. And a small surgery is needed to the Inland Revenue Act to ensure that there will be proper and efficient way in which taxes in relation to cryptocurrency could be collected. And yes, basically I expected it to be part of the budget. Unfortunately, I don't see it expressly, but at the same time there's one sentence that I see that may have an impact with regard to that. I'll read that section. Also, to strengthen the government's efforts against money laundering and the financing of terrorism, necessary legal provisions are proposed to be introduced in all tax legislations for enforcement, including the interpretation of tax-related crimes, prosecution by Attorney General, and imposition of fines and penalties. Well, it's a very vague proposal from when you're looking at it from the taxation perspective, but I don't know whether within that framework express tax legislation would be introduced to the Inland Revenue Act to make it clear as to the manner in which the cryptocurrencies would be taxed in Sri Lanka. Not taxed in Sri Lanka, the manner in which the taxpayer should maintain records and comply with the cryptocurrency activities in Sri Lanka.
All right, Suresh. So thank you for that comment. Maybe they'll take it up for next year budget. Dana, if I can ask you one question. I think there was a chat around civic responsibility bringing about the government and the taxpayer. On these lines, I also want to just ask you, how important is transparency? And do you see an angle, it is not only about requiring civic responsibility from the taxpayer, the government also has to do certain things in relation to transparency. We did see something about tax exemptions being given to entities would be put on the or published in the website. In relation to this, what are your thoughts, and with your global experience, Dhananath, what do you think that they can do more if it is not sufficient?
No, I think that's a welcoming proposal. Finance Minister mentioned that the list of companies who receive tax exemptions will be listed in the website 2 times a year. So I think that's important. But I think what we tried to push for the budget was to have a proper framework when it comes to providing tax exemptions. So anyone would know what's the process, and based on what matrix that you can get a tax exemption. For that, what we basically proposed was a tax credit system, and the tax credit is mainly linked to the number of job opportunities that you create, and it's like a credit which you can claim at a later point, so then everyone knows, and you can align it based on the economic growth and the national agenda, and that's what pretty much being practiced in countries like Singapore. At the same time, I think adding on to what Suresh mentioned, there was also a conversation about a tax ombudsman, because now it seems sometimes, given the aspirational targets given to the Indian Revenue Department, that sometimes the same taxpayer getting into inconvenience, asking to pay more. So in that front, when it comes to tax ombudsman, and even the processors of like on tax assessing could have been an area for improvement even at a global stage. One quick point also on the VAT threshold and SCL. I think VAT is, as we all know, a better tax than an SCL, because that may have a cascading impact. VAT is that you're charging only for the value addition. So even countries like New Zealand, when we interviewed the former New Zealand finance minister, Sir Roger Douglas, what he said was, there it's the GST. They imposed GST for everything. So, but what they did was they imposed GST, but they removed the other taxes. So that having that level playing field and the predictability is important, and to have like not too many taxes one on top of the other, which having a cascading impact. Again, the tariff simplification is welcome, but as we all know, this was not the first time that this tariff simplification of 5%, 10%, 15% was being pronounced. So at least we hope that it will get implemented this time. So overall, as I mentioned, what I see is, President in the first budget, he pretty much covered quite a lot in February this year. It's a matter of execution, and for some it requires a little bit of time. But ultimately, it boils down to implementation and actually having that incentive structure and ecosystem that we can actually achieve these targets. Because as we mentioned, if we really fail to achieve that 15.4%, we will additionally lose about another $70 million US, because we may not be able to adhere to that governance-linked bonds, and then it's a spillover impact on across the sector. So that's why we have to be quite cautious.
Thank you, Dana. Suresh?
Yes, I think as you said, that this budget, the main feature is there are no new taxes, but at the same time there is a generation of higher revenue coming from mainly the lowering of the threshold of the VAT and the social security contribution levy, and in a broader context, during the last year and even during this year, tax collection by the Inland Revenue Department has been good. They have been meeting all their targets, But in that context, it's also important, it's good news for the government and for all of us, but at the same time, there may be, how do I say, the stories that may not be visible or heard by many, and that is where the forum of the tax ombudsman becomes important, which Dana rightly pointed out. And I will conclude this session inviting my learned friend to talk a little bit about the tax ombudsman that we keep praying for.
Thank you, Mr. Suresh. It was some time ago, the tax 2011. Yes, that was their system. Thereafter, after this tax appeal commission, that sort of arrangement was removed and no longer there. There is no any sign to reintroduce that sort of tax reimbursement, because this appeal path, once you look into the appeal path, if there is any assessment is issued, you can appeal that one, and you can appeal to the Commissioner General. That will be heard at his level by two different officers. In that case also, if you failed, then to get your justice, then you can go to that one, take up that one to the Tax Appeal Commission. So that legal part is there, but anyhow, for small issues, you can't go to that extent. So tax ombudsman in this stage maybe ease the life of the taxpayer if it is introduced.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So with that comment, we will conclude, and thank you, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Reviving Growth and Rebuilding Trust, KPMG Budget Analysis 2026. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we just concluded our second focused panel session, and a very big thank you goes out to Mr. Suresha Rai Pereira, our Principal Head of Tax and Regulatory for KPMG Sri Lanka. And along with him, our eminent panelists who all have a focus and who have specialism in taxation, of course, one of the main topics of a budget. So thank you very much, as they have given us an idea of revenue reform and resilience with tax policy. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we go on to our next focused session. Now, why this is very important actually is because it looks at focus sectors in the budget proposals 2026, and in fact part of the government's policy for over the last year. That is a focus on digital economy and financial services as Sri Lanka pivots towards a more service-oriented economy. This is indeed a focus sector, and many budget proposals have been presented. Of course, I must say that the budget proposals are yet being presented, so many more to come. However, we have handpicked this session and this topic to focus on the digital economy and financial services and how they will enable growth through the budget 2026. Let me, without further ado, introduce once again our moderator, Mr. Sured Rajakarya, our partner and Chief Operating Officer for KPMG Sri Lanka, who has joined me once again in the studio. He will be introducing and directing questions to our panelists on digital economy and financial services. Joining us virtually, I also have the great pleasure of welcoming Mr. Damit Pallewatha, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Hatton National Bank PLC, Mr. Bingumal Thevaratantri, Vice Chairman, the Chamber of Commerce and CEO of Standard Chartered Bank, Sri Lanka, and Mr. Channa De Silva, CEO of Lanka Pay Private Limited. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us, and we have some doyens of the financial services and the digital economy joining us today. So over to you, Mr. Rajakarya.
Thank you, Nipuni. Like as you said, we've structured it into 3 sessions, and this is the 3rd session, obviously of some importance, but not more important than what we have talked about. But digital economy and financial services to enable growth into the 2030 and thereafter has been a big component of government's discussions. And like you said again, the budget speech is still going on. So some of the ministers who were supposed to join us are unable to join. But at the same time, the topics we have picked has already been announced. So that's a good side of it. So we've already discussed some of the topics in the first session and the tax policies in the second one. And hopefully we can bring in more insight, meaningful suggestions on what's been discussed on the financial services side, SME side, and digital economy side. So we are fortunate again to be joined by another distinguished panel who have been introduced very kindly by Nipuni already, so I'm not going to take too much time. Let me jump straight into digital transformation by the government. Yeah? So digital, as the President has said, is the process of leveraging digital technologies to transform business processes, and about 30 billion has been allocated for many aspects. Some of the aspects are providing digital infrastructure for government institutions, data and information management, digital platforms and applications, connectivity, communications, security, privacy, improving health, human organizational capabilities, and governance and policy. We also did a survey, a poll with the business community, and asked our people, as Sri Lanka accelerates into digital transformation, which policies should the budget of 2026 prioritize to strengthen the digital economy? And the findings are on the screen. First, highest is obviously digital infrastructure, and also cyber security and data safety. So we're going to jump straight into you, Channa, because you are the expert on this panel to talk on this topic, being CEO of Lanka Pay. So Lanka Pay has been central to Sri Lanka's cashless journey. What innovations are you introducing to expand this digital payment adoption across underserved communities? One part of the question. And also address some of these issues has it been in place to address digital infrastructure, cyber security, and data safety issues? Channa, over to you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
So I think let's first look at the context of our country in terms of the technology adoption and the infrastructure. So if you and we are talking about underserved communities, right? So in that sense, out of the 22 million or so population, almost 80% live in rural areas. So which is one distinct factor when you compare to other countries. And the other aspect is, like, if you look at the financial services, almost 85%, maybe even more, have bank accounts. Where if you take other countries, it's very low, right? So it's a well banked country. Then the smartphone penetration actually is roughly about 70% household thanks to COVID. So these are actually factors of infrastructure that supports the digital economy. So all our efforts have been based on some of these aspects, and also being sort of Asian country, we also looked at the accessibility, right? In that sense, we found that when you look at the entire ATM network, roughly about 65 to 70% of the population use the ATMs on Sinhala and Tamil language. So a language is also a barrier or requirement to access financial services. So having all this, looking at all these, the concept was we have the financial sector infrastructure in place. I think it has been there for some time. It has been sort of raring to go. So in that sense, our concept was, if people are already accessing some of the services, bring all the other services to them, to bring the services to citizens, immaterial of they are, by using the technology that they already use. That was the concept. So bring the services to them. So in that sense, that is where actually we initially brought in what we call this concept called GovPay, which was basically, nothing sort of, I wouldn't say extraordinary, but it's using the existing government infrastructure or lack of it. Actually, GovPay is to target government departments that do not have any infrastructure, no systems. And how do you facilitate payment? So that is what actually this GovPay is all about, where we are bringing payment capability to departments that do not have any infrastructure in place. If you take the police, right, the traffic fines, they have no infrastructure in place. They're absolutely zero. They're all based on paper. So what we did was, using the existing infrastructure without any cost to government, we brought in a mechanism to facilitate a payment. So this is, so we have expanded this to now 200 plus departments, and it's going to expand. And we are also going to bring in a concept called GovPay Plus, which is basically expanding this solution to departments that have systems. So as government digitalizes all these departments, in the future, we will bring in all those departments under GovPay Plus and integrate them as well. So that's actually in a sense, how we are going to expand this current capability across the country as well as across the government. Then also, we already have an existing technology using digital signatures. Now, what actually happens is, especially if you look at rural folk and others, they have to come to Colombo and government departments to access services, even to submit a form. So when we have infrastructure called Lanka Sign, which the banks, the private sector, everybody is using. So once we bring that, customers can digitally sign whatever documents that they need to submit, either to a bank or a government department. They can just submit remotely from wherever they are. Using a smartphone or any other technology that they use. So that is another way we are going to digitize using the existing infrastructure rather than having to have additional infrastructure. Then two other concepts that we are bringing in. One is called the payment exchange name, which is already actually implemented as a technology, which is almost similar to UPI of India, where you don't do a fund transfer. This is primarily actually targeting person-to-person payments. When you want to send a payment, you don't need to know the other person's bank account, branch number, even the bank name. They just need to disclose the mobile number and an alias, which is so where you can just fund transfer using somebody's alias rather than knowing banking credentials. So this technology is already in place. We are actually deploying that across the banks and across the systems. Last but not least, we are also implemented a solution which is basically using request to pay, where any person, I would say a plumber, electrician, mechanic, if they want to request a payment, basically they can basically send a simple request, which goes as a universal payment link,
which will come as an in-app message in any app a customer has, which that they can just use to make a payment by simply clicking on it. So this all these are done basically, and this will be supported by trilingual apps that are put out already, like the banks, NBFIs, and the fintechs, and can they consume by any of the apps that they are already using. So the whole idea is to bring the technology to people, immaterial of where they are, by in their preferred language, as well as in a seamless and a convenient manner.
Okay, that's very extensive clarification of all the digital projects in store already introduced. I think last time, in the last year's budget, we discussed about digital identity, if I'm right. And the government has still allocated about 2 billion for coordination of Sri Lanka's unique digital identity project. Anything you can say around that, Channa, in terms of implementation?
So I think it is a good thing. I think, but I think we also need to look at the context of Sri Lanka, right? For example, if you take India, they introduced Aadhaar system. Primary objective of introducing Aadhaar system was access to financial services. People did not have bank accounts. It was less than 20%. So they did not have any way to authenticate people using financial system. So they brought in Aadhaar. Now the bank account penetration is more than 80% or so. That's thanks to Aadhaar. But in Sri Lanka, it's contextually different. We already have existing 80+% people having bank accounts. So right now what we are using is the authentication of the banks that they already have, the KYCs that they have done to authenticate a person on access, right? However, I think the most important part of the digital ID is, I guess, the new customers that are joining, plus, I guess, the government services. How do you authenticate somebody when they access government services? This is absolute a must to come in. To some extent, it will help the financial services as well. But I think the primary benefit would be people accessing government services, because they can't actually use the banking or the financial sector KYC for authentication. They would have to have different mechanisms. So if and when they bring in digital ID, I wouldn't say it's going to be easy deployment, because there are already existing DRP, register of person systems. So these need to be integrated. The data needs to be collected, cleansed. Because I know there are IDs, duplicate IDs, so many data that needs to be cleansed. So I don't think it can be implemented in my technology opinion, it cannot be implemented in 6 months. It will take time, but it's something that we must have. Only thing is how long it will take, it depends on the execution capability of the team.
Okay, thank you for that. I think most of the projects which have been carried out are, I think, supporting the digital economy, and the trajectory is right, I think, in terms of where the country is going. We also discussed about export growth and export in our first session today. I'm going to jump to Damit. Basically, looking at your banking experience as well. So for Sri Lanka's economic recovery, we have to double exports from about 14% of GDP, which is currently at 14%. By 2030, we have to double or more. Do you think that the process of exports and remittances through the banking system is appropriate and adequately influences exporters? See, we can keep exporting, but the proceeds also have to come into the country to facilitate some of the other requirements. So what challenges need to be addressed to achieve such a state in about 5 years? What are the systems and processes which have to be, looked at, remodeled, or made easy, or doing business in Sri Lanka to be made easy, so that the export remittances also come to Sri Lanka? At the same time, we also double export growth, Damit.
So thank you so much for having me, Suren. Before I jump into the exports, maybe I was in the parliament listening to the budget speech about the national ID, digital ID. I think President has gave a promise by third quarter next year, they will issue the first digital ID for the country. I think that's a fantastic statement he has made in the parliament. So, having heard that, let's moving on to the exports. I think this problem, this matter has to be looked at in two fronts. First one is whether the export itself has sufficient capacity to get double. Do we have necessary infrastructure, policies, or accessibility and the strategic direction to double the export volumes that we do at the moment? Number two is whether the banking system is the facilitator to bring that the remittances or inflows in, and do we have necessary controls to do it? If I look at the first aspect, I think there are a few things that stand out. If you look at our export basket, I think this has been brought in many forums, so that require a proper broad basing. So maybe we need to reassess what we need to do in terms of export growth over the next maybe 10-15 years, aligned to the competitive advantage and the global demand. So somebody needs to map those things and say, look here, this is what we need to focus on exports in the next few years to come. So aligned to that, we also need to have some process where we bring the value-added products and the processes which supports part of this value-adding value chain. So if we do that, coupling with renegotiating bilateral agreements we have, I think President made a statement today with the budget speech. They are in the process of renegotiating some of the bilateral agreements that we have, which is good news for exporters. That will also help, bringing that necessary volume to go through the systems. And also the key challenge what we are doing is, if a new exporter to be born, for that matter, so there are so many challenges that he undergo. So, there are institutions that already have the capability to do it if structured properly, like the EDB. So can they evolve into a single window facilitation hub for exporters? So those things will go a long way, because they have there are so many certifications and accreditations are required in export process. So that all, pile up into bringing this export volume to double over the next, say, 5 years of time. Then moving into the inflow and outflow, there are couple of observations that we make over a period of time. That is, so we monitor all our imports to make sure that whatever that is coming into the country are recorded and everything is accounted for. But in terms of exports, so we believe that there has to be some elevated level of cross-monitoring that ensures that all exports that we do from Sri Lanka, the related export proceeds have reached the country. So maybe it is reaching, we don't have a proper reconciliation of what is being done. There is a process that is being implemented, which is evolving, so which will get culminated into accounting, yes, the right volume of export proceeds commensurate with what we are exporting are getting into the country. So that will lead the credibility and the authenticity of the numbers that we are talking about, and through that I think we need to facilitate some level of incentives or motivation to carry on the exports, giving due credit to the exporters who bring the proceeds to the banking system. To facilitate that, even the banking systems needs to get elevated a little bit to manage cross-border payments. There has to be value chain facilitated digital systems across the banking system, which connects the local exporters with overseas buyers. There has to be some level of authenticity, maybe some part of the digitization to play with the technologies like the blockchain, where other countries are playing that. Having said that, so if we get those systems connected to our exporters, so it automatically get recorded, and we will be able to connect with the systems on the other side, which works the exporters' job also easy as much as we expect to send those proceeds to the banking system. I think banks are investing on those systems, which is encouraging. So it's a fact that how do we make sure we bring the necessary awareness across the exporters, how they can connect with their supply chains and the value chains to these systems, so your inflows automatically will come into the formal banking system. However, when they bring the formal proceeds to the formal banking system, we believe it will be better or encouraging for exporters if we have maybe, I heard during the previous discussions, there were some tax credits, there were some various incentive schemes have been proposed. Some scheme is in effect, which is driven by the state, so that will more encouraging for exporters to come and bring everything into the more formal banking system. So that is my point of view, Suren. I hope I answered the query that you made.
That was very detailed, Damit. I think you covered the two aspects we had in mind anyway. But what's, I think in the first session we talked to the chairman of EDB, and he was very confident that we will reach at least 30% of GDP by 2030 in terms of exports, and also to move away from traditional exports and to broad base it, like you said, and look at value added as well, which is key. But I'm more interested in, the banking system also enabling these exporters to bring in the funds, and also maybe get into a discussion in terms of these incentives, whether it's tax credits or otherwise, some sort of incentives to make sure that the export proceeds reach the country, and then we meet all the other targets set by IMF for Sri Lanka. We will come back to you in a moment, Damit. Since we talked about IMF as well, I'm going to ask Bingu something. Before I ask that question, we had another poll asking how will IMF engagement shape Sri Lanka's fiscal and economic path in 2026. In addition to this, we had our former central bank, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, whose views were very positive as to where the government is going in terms of meeting all those governance targets. So Bingu, you will see supporting fiscal reforms is like 48% in terms of IMF's engagement, and strengthening stability is about 39%. So I think I'm sure you would agree. Before we get into the question to you is, given your experience in global markets, how can Sri Lanka leverage the budget of 2026 to attract foreign investments into its financial services sector? Because we find some of the financial services sector guys are probably trying to find another location or walking away. What can the budget do to bring in more foreign investments into the financial services sector, Bingu?
Yeah. Suren, just a quick comment on the IMF stats. I'm sure it really supports the fiscal reforms, but I think we have to, customize it to our own needs. I think we've done a reasonable job so far. Simplify, keeping the taxes high and taxing a limited base will not really help the growth in the medium to long term. That's our view. Currently, what we have achieved is great. We have great primary surplus. It's a great story. But how far we can go with the current tax structure compared to other Asian countries would be a question to be answered. We'll come back to your question. You spoke about basically investments or FDIs coming into the banking sector. How do we attract investments in the banking sector? First of all, again, about investments, Suren, just to give a perspective, I think we have miserably failed in the last 10 years in terms of stability. Because reality is, investments or the FDIs are, largely depend on policy consistency. If you look at markets like Vietnam, Singapore, Korea, you can go on and on, Thailand, even markets like Mauritius or Dubai, policy consistency has played a significant role, and the ease of doing business is an outcome of that. The reality is that. And generally, policy consistency comes with political stability, something that Sri Lanka didn't have in the last 10 years. Hopefully, since we have a strong government now, we'll expect things to get better and better in the coming years. But we have to walk the talk. Coming out of a default, when you're at a CCC rating, attracting foreign capital for anything would be critical from a OECD, investor. So even if you look at Asian investors, when they look at multiple markets we invest, they will always look at the RWAs attached to it and the translation risk, country risk. before coming into a market. So that's why still the FDIs, though we see a lot of pockets of FDIs coming in, it's a great story, don't get me wrong. We are like President also mentioned today, we have $800 million of FDIs this year so far, which is a great story coming out of a default. But to get that big ticket transaction coming in and foreign investor coming to Sri Lanka to buy a bank, for an example, might take some time. The other interesting, important thing to note is that Sri Lanka's banking sector had delivered returns about 10%. If you look at during the crisis, we were like 12%, 13%. We were around actually 12% ROE industry, as an industry. Then after the bond restructuring, because of the capital gains, our returns went up to 18, 19%. Now it's hovering around 17%. So as an industry average, ROE is hovering around 15% would be critical for us. And individual banks who are looking at foreign investors will have to hover around 17, 18% because when they compare markets, like especially African markets, definitely deliver much higher returns. Even the US would deliver double digit. Some of the US banks are delivering double digit. So the ROE component is also critical for a bank to attract these foreign investments. And of course, the rating is a big conversation. So hopefully with the next rating upgrade, then we are fairly confident that Sri Lanka might surprise much faster than expected. The rating upgrade might happen in the next 18 months in our view. If that happens, you will see more and more investors looking at the Sri Lanka's banking sector. The reality is banking sector has delivered really good results. From a capital gains perspective, I think whoever invested in the banking sector has really made money. From an overall investor standpoint, as an outsider when they come to Sri Lanka, the challenge is the tax structure. Now we pay above more than 50% taxes in Sri Lanka, and for a foreign investor on dividends, there's another 15%. So the problem is when you put that tax structure to a foreign investment, that becomes non-viable at this point. So we are not at all lobbying for lower taxes at this point because we are on IMF program and we know that we have to stay on course. Revenues are important, but when you compare, there are other markets giving you better returns, better tax structures, and of course better scale. So that's why you see some of the Sri Lankan banks have gone to markets like Bangladesh, some are looking at markets in Africa, some are going and actually buying assets in offshore locations. They are doing a little bit of offshore banking because they also got pretty large balance sheets because the dollar flows are pretty large, and they are also using those dollar flows to buy assets outside Sri Lanka. So right now, local banks are doing multiple things to leverage and utilize their balance sheet or optimize their balance sheet. They of course have big aspirations to go beyond Sri Lanka. At some point, some banks will do that in different forms. But for the foreign investors to come here and buy a bank, I think there's an opportunity. But right now, Sureni, Sri Lanka is a bank market. We have about 12 plus local banks, plus 4 foreign, many foreign banks, I would say, 4 big foreign banks, and there are many regional banks. And right now, for 22 million people and for the size of the economy we have, we are overbanked right now. So when the consolidation happens, you might see a foreign investor coming into the country, and that will be a very good sign for Sri Lanka. You can treat it as a sign of recovery, actually, when you see those foreign investors coming into the sector, big tickets coming into the sector. Having said that, I'm sure Damit will have more insights. Many foreign investors buying our stocks at the moment. So not that we don't have foreign investors. We have foreign investors coming into the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think not only stocks, into even the capital markets and the money market as well. You mentioned about the FDIs and investments. I think the number which the president put out was about 823 million received during the year. But unfortunately, only about 15%, 133 million is in equity. The balance is all loans and stuff like that, which has to be paid back. So I'm not sure what's your view, whether we are attracting the right FDIs to support the economic recovery, or is it just loans?
No, I think we have to be happy with what we have reached, Suren, though we talk a lot about FDIs for 40, like from the time we opened the economy, we have gained something like $23 billion of FDIs, whereas Vietnam would get about $20 billion for a year. Yeah. The largest FDIs I have seen in my life is 2017 when we sold the Hambantota port. That's $1 billion plus another 700. That year was 1.7 billion. I think 2011 we got, when Shangri-La came in, we got more than $1 billion. So we are not a big FDI market anyway. Coming out of a default, in whichever form, having 800, I would say we should be happy. But for us to get that quantum leap, Suren, we need better framework. I'll also quickly touch on this framework as well. The new framework is called Be Ready. The ease of doing business is completely gone now. So there's a new index called Be Ready Index, and 50 countries have gone there already. It basically focuses on regulatory framework, government services, and operational efficiencies. It has 10 other themes. It has digital ready, entry barriers, exit barriers, labor laws, taxes, so many other areas, land reforms, and all of that. So we had to focus on the Be Ready Index for us to get a ranking below 75, because when we were in ease of doing business, we reached to something like close to 80 somewhere there, and we went up to 90, 99, wherever. Vietnam was also always at the 70th rank in the ease of doing business, but their policy consistency, and once you enter, you got the scale and you got the corridors working for you. So I think we have to get some work done, and more importantly, walk the talk, continue the stability story, political stability, macro stability, economic stability, policy consistency. I think that will drive the FDIs. It doesn't happen overnight.
Okay, great. Thanks for those comments. Very insightful, Bingu. Moving from the same topic into Damit again, we talked about incentives as well when you finished off your comments. As a bank and businessman, do you think tax exemptions and other incentives make sense if the government wants private individuals to take startup risk or an innovative business proposition? Because otherwise, if government gets involved in building and developing businesses, that cost will be transferred to people through other means when these losses keep accumulating. So the question is, do you think some of these incentives, I mean, in the export and the proceeds remittances, you talked about, facilitating and having incentives or tax credits. Do you think those kind of incentives would help for private individuals to take up the startup risk?
Obviously it helps, Suren, but the context has to be looked at differently. I think Bingu touched a little bit on it. So when a private investor invest on a startup or innovative product or a service proposition, they would plan next 5 years, 10 years, how they generate returns on the ROI. On the investment. So your policy consistency plays a bigger role. So you should be able to make some sense when I make this investment and take a risk and cater other markets from Sri Lanka. So what is it that I will be able to generate consistently from this project? So that will be the key consideration. So around that, if we can build incentives, so based on the tangible outcomes or outputs that they will deliver through the program, rather than offering something on the plate from the day one that they are working on, which is going to be the trend we have seen in some other markets as well. So that will definitely help. So in that process, so the government is facilitating the process. They are not putting excess money or additional money or the tax revenue in that process, but by facilitating, so they are driving tangible outcomes, get investors to come and park their investments and get them to use optimally. And for the country, the benefit is multiple in terms of not only the output, even the employment can be something that we can derive. I believe, so therefore incentives play a vital role, whilst the policy consistently play a much bigger role in that sense.
Okay, that makes sense. I think when we talk of land, labor, capital and entrepreneurship, I think somebody needs to focus on entrepreneurship and also make sure that the risk-taking is enabled in the country. And Bingu's comments on ease of doing or Be Ready Index, if we try to improve on those, we would obviously be on a reset for the country.
Of course, Suren, maybe one comment. If you look at the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Sri Lanka, where your startups play a role, it is building up over the, say, last 5 years or maybe 10 years. It's slowly building up. So I think this is high time, maybe a very specific focused incentive scheme or some scheme built around it. So then I think as a country with the talent that we have, we should be able to take it to a different level.
very encouraging, Damit. And having two bankers is basically to make sure that they fund these startups and the SMEs. So that's
obviously
where
we will do. Obviously we will do
okay.
so. Yes.
So that's why, I mean, you talked of policy consistency. I think that's where I'm going next to Bingu, because I mean, on the SME framework, lots of announcements Bingu in the budget. $1 billion for current budgetary provisions, $4 billion for property managed establishment and development of industrial zones, providing loans at concessionary interest rates, collateral-free lending, $7 billion for credit guarantee of loans, $25 billion loan scheme for, I mean, at concessional rate of, I think 8% was what the president announced, and a 5-year period. I think all the SMEs are going to be really happy on these announcements. But a general understanding is that our biggest challenges are access to finance, which can be solved hopefully with the budget announcements, high borrowing costs, and inconsistent policy and fragmented views. I mean, Damit also alluded to some of them. SMEs contribute to over 50%. I think President announced it was 52% of GDP and employ at least half of the workforce. What reforms or policy consistency do you believe are critical to sustaining investor confidence and the banking sector stability to overcome these challenges? You need to balance both sides, right? The banking sector also has to be stable. Investor confidence also is required so that, you know, SMEs start investing. How do we get this balance?
Yeah, thanks, Suren. Yeah, so you're right. We have over 1 million small and medium scale enterprises altogether, but 3.5 million plus employees working. Interestingly, before the pandemic, I did some studies. There were like 2.5 million of the SME employee base below 30,000 rupees for a month. This is way before the pandemic, around 2019. So I don't know where those people are now in terms of what they get now. So larger part of that must be below poverty now, or at least vulnerable. So from that perspective, also reviving SMEs would be critical. From a banking sector perspective, we have credit to the private sector, about 10 to 11% going into the SMEs, because SMEs got so many other ways of borrowing using their own capital as well. I think from a governance standpoint, I think again, coming back to your point on the various schemes, Suren, is encouraging to see. I just looked at the total numbers. There's capital expenditure of 73 billion and recurrent expenditure of 46 billion on SMEs. And there are very clearly certain loans going up to 50 million rupees, 80% interest up to 10 years. Those are great outcomes with 2-year grace periods. There are actually very small loans like up to 1 million, 7% interest, 5 years. There are grants of like 100,000 for women-led small micro enterprises. Then there's institutional support with credit guarantee scheme and all of that. I think it's a very comprehensive budget from a SME standpoint. Now, when we do all these things on concession lending, yes, government is of course subsidizing, taxpayers are paying, and banks will have to underwrite the risk. So it's critical that we make sure that one, we have a bad debt portfolio. I can also link it up to the previous question as well in terms of getting investment into the banking sector. We have bad debt portfolio of still about 11.2%. It was 13 point plus, it has come down now. So getting this down to mid-single digit would be critical from a gross perspective. Of course, net is around 5%. Getting that bad debt portfolio down would be critical. So anything, I think there are programs to revive some of these SMEs as well. Of course, banks are also playing a huge role to give concessions and, you know, stretch the loans and revive those. I think striking that balance would be critical, because one is funding the, you know, the interest. The other one is a credit risk. So banks will have to manage both, because the reality is we also play on depositors' funds. It's not all shareholders' money. So we have to strike a balance. How do we strike a balance? I think with all these programs, with 70 billion plus 46 billion going into the system, I think it's critical we bring governance into the system. I also heard Suresh talking about the whole VAT threshold coming down. I think registering all these SMEs properly would be critical. They all have some kind of registration. Then doing all their business through their business entity would be critical, because a lot of them sometimes, you know, even if you go to a store and if they say, I don't want to pay, you know, I don't want to take card, you'll pay 3%, but you transfer cash. then they always give you the promoter's personal bank account. So making sure that the funds go through their whatever enterprise account would be critical. So that kind of governance framework is critical for us to get the maximum output, and more importantly track the revenues and the capital levels and where the money is going, because we have to end of the day track the cash flows to make sure that we pay our debts and return our depositor money back. So I would say while we are putting money behind this, bringing them into the tax system and the governance structure would be critical, Suren, for us to run this.
I think that's a good point to end, I think. I mean, widen the tax base is also one of those requirements from IMF and the government point of view. That will increase tax revenue, enable growth, and obviously rebuild trust in Sri Lanka over the next few years at least. Hopefully we don't have to wait till 2030, all these rating upgrades and all. If it happens during the next few months, I think Sri Lanka would be on the right track. And the budget has positively picked up on all the requirements, and it's obviously it's a governance linked budget, I think, in terms of all the requirements set out by International Monetary Fund as well as supported by the government. So thank you very much, Damit, Channa and Bingu, for your insightful, thoughtful comments and for participating in this presentation whilst the budget is still being presented hot at the Parliament. So we wrap up that session, and I would like to hand over to Nipuni.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Suren Rajakaria, and our eminent panelists. Thank you very much for joining. Ladies and gentlemen, we heard a number of key words, especially with this focus session for digital economy, for and financial services, and stability and policy consistency being one of those underlying themes that would promote digital economy and the financial services sector. Now, as was pointed out by many of our panelists and Mr. Suren Rajakaria a few minutes ago, it's a governance-linked budget. It's focused on broad-basing taxation and bringing Sri Lanka back on the path of reviving growth and rebuilding trust for our stakeholders within Sri Lanka, be it SMEs, be it the individual taxpayer, or our stakeholders abroad, our investors, our supporting governments around the world who look at Sri Lanka as a possible place of investment and trust and overall collaboration. So with all of these points in focus, the budget 2026 has been presented with many proposals in Parliament today. In fact, it's still going on, as was pointed out a short while ago. So I hope you have, in the course of our presentation from the KPMG budget analysis over the last 2 hours or so, received some valuable insights, be it on taxation and taxation policy, on various focus sectors, and most importantly, how we can stimulate our economy to go towards growth and rebuilding trust. So I would also like to point out that we had initially scheduled to hear from ministers and key figures of government fresh from Parliament to discuss all the budget proposals. Unfortunately, because the budget reading is still going on, we could not connect with them, but KPMG is looking to connect with them for their views in the future. We will bring further insights over the next few days as the budget proposals unfold and we see the true impact of them, discuss with our experts, some of them who have very kindly taken time off their schedules to be with us today. And ladies and gentlemen, we hope that with those key insights on economic growth, on taxation policy, a view on focus sectors, Sri Lanka will use these budget proposals as an opportunity, as a stepping stone, I'm sure, that will take us towards reviving growth and rebuilding trust. Once again, thank you very much for joining the KPMG Budget Analysis 2026. On that note, we wrap up our presentation, and do stay tuned to the KPMG social media posts and other informative events and highlights that they will bring on the development of the budget proposals and the focus for Sri Lanka in 2026. Thank you once again. Good night.